We now welcome in Joe Freeman from the Oregonian / Oregon Live via telephone. Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How are y'all doing tonight?
Oh, we're doing great. We're doing great. Now, during the preseason, Coach Terry Stotts said that the defense was still a work in progress. What did you evaluate from the defense now that the preseason's over with?
You know, it's a little too hard to take any, grand declarations away from the preseason just because Terry mixed and matched lineups, experimented with his starters a little bit, went deep into his roster. So it's kind of hard to take anything definitive away. I will say that I think Evan Turner will help the defensive rotation quite a bit. And certainly whenever Festus Ezeli returns to the court, he's going to help that interior defense quite a bit. But talking with guys on the team and seeing things here and there, I think just the chemistry and comfortability with being with each other as long as these guys now have been with each other, I think that naturally stimulates growth. And in fact, under Terry Stotts, the Blazers have kind of a history of evolving and getting better in year two under him. I mean, if you look to that group that returned 2 years ago, 13 of 15 players came back. They made quite a big leap, from the bottom half of the NBA into the top 10 in defensive efficiency. And so I think it's between the natural progression and just the familiarity, and then, of course, with a couple of defensive additions, I think the Blazers will be better defensively.
You mentioned Evan Turner will help in that lineup. What specifically can he bring to the table when he comes out there on the court?
Well, he's long, he's athletic. If you're talking about defense, if you're talking about offense, he's obviously a good playmaker, a good distributor. And this is a guy that can do a little bit of everything. He can collect assists. He's a really good rebounder for a guard, or I guess a small forward now he's playing. And he can score too. And I think what we're going to see as much as anything is just having another ball handler will be able to alleviate a lot of the pressure that Damian and CJ put on or have on themselves. And it's just another weapon for Terry Stotts. I mean, when you look at this roster, 1 through 10, they're pretty deep. They have a lot of versatility, a lot of different lineups and weapons they can throw at you. And I think, Evan Turner kind of helps.
Coach Stotts announced the starting lineup today on Rip City Radio. No surprises: Lillard, McCollum, Harkless, Aminu, and Plumlee. What stands out to you the most about that group when you consider all the different rotations we saw on the court during the preseason?
Well, again, preseason not so much, but looking back to last year, what they were able to do over the final 2 months into the playoffs, they developed a nice rapport with each other. And I think that has a lot to do with why Terry went with that starting lineup this year, or is going with them. That, coupled with Mo Harkless, was just simply beat out Allen Crabbe and Evan Turner for that role. I mean, he was the only kind of question mark going into the year. Really been impressed with what I've seen out of Mo, though. He's a guy that kind of struggled to find his footing, find his way early last year. Was in and out of the rotation and then was out for quite a while, but never pouted, had the back of Damian Lillard and his teammates, and really found his niche playing that 3 when they moved to Aminu to 4. And the defensive versatility that he brings with Al Farouk, with them being able to switch if they guard point guards to 4s and 3s and 4s, really opens up a little bit of that defensive improvement that we were just talking about. And then that, coupled with what we presume to be will be long-range shooting improvement for Maurice. I think he's sort of a little bit of an X factor for this team, and I think he's poised for a little bit better year than we've seen out of him specifically last year.
Joe, when we talk about this lineup returning, we talk about the depth, we talk about versatility of Maurice Harkless and Evan Turner as a ball handler. Do you think that the depth is going to translate into more ball pressure? Because I thought I saw more ball pressure in the preseason. It's too early to tell. But in terms of pick and roll coverage, do you think the Trailblazers will be able to apply more pressure and shrink the floor?
They should be. They should be fresher, and they should be, more. Simply have more energy to do that, especially, talking about Evan taking pressure off Dame, and CJ, not only does that as a defender, but he does it as a ball handler. They have a little bit less responsibility on their hands on offense, which allows them more energy on defense. And I wrote about this, I think, the first week of training camp. I heard from multiple players that Damian's pick-and-roll defense had improved quite a bit. That was one thing they had noticed during the volunteer workouts in September. And talking with Damian, he kind of found an angle and kind of found a way to navigate pick and rolls better and more effortlessly. And the hope from him, and I think from the Blazers, is that he'll be able to slip around screens without taking as much of a beating. And if he is able to do that, he's able to stay fresher, and that will help all aspects of his game. But, I mean, certainly, Michael, the depth, having that depth allows you to experiment a little bit more with that. But Terry Stotts isn't one who really wants to break from his kind of core defensive beliefs too much. Experimentation or changes with the defense. I think the Blazers are kind of banking on that internal growth, that organic growth with just a roster that's been together for a while.
Joe, when you talk about that organic growth, first of all, when your best player is committed on the defensive end, that's always a positive thing. But when you talk about this team in a basketball family kind of frame of mind, a year ago or 2 years ago, going away to San Diego, coming together, and returning now as a starting lineup, do you think that team chemistry, or how do you think that team chemistry is going to translate on the defensive end this season?
Well, I just think it'll translate in all aspects. I mean, we're talking a lot about defense, and I know fans want to see a lot of defensive improvement, but the NBA is a pretty offensive-minded game right now, and we're in the middle of a significant offensive renaissance. And the Blazers, offensively, that's their strength. They're equipped to exploit teams in a lot of different ways, and Terry Stotts' flow, motion-based offense, accentuates that and capitalizes on that chemistry. The chemistry fuels that. When you look at how close this team is off the court, you see that transcend onto the court through the offense. Now, that certainly will surface on defense as well through communicating, through talking through different sets, through learning each other's tendencies, where they want to be and how they play certain pick and roll coverages and whether they're in their black or white defense and that sort of thing. But I think where the chemistry really unfolds is just in being together and this was a very, very, by the end of the year, and really midway through as well, a very close team last year. And I've seen a lot of close teams in Portland over the last 10, 11 years I've done this. But I think last year was as close as any group I had seen. And because they returned the bulk of that, the majority of those guys, I think that you'll see that carry over, and the stuff that we're talking about, strategically will manifest itself.
Joe, when you look at the expectations for this team this year, they made such a leap last year. Is this one of those years where you're hoping that this team gets to the playoffs and then can make an impact in the playoffs, and you're not too much concerned about the record, or what are the realistic expectations for this team heading into this season?
It's a really good question. Talking with Ed Davis yesterday, and I'm sort of writing a little bit about this right now, and it'll come out tomorrow, but, there are very high expectations for this team internally and with the fan base. I mean, you guys can probably sense it walking around and just the people you encounter. People are really high on this team right now. When you have the season that you had last year, 44 wins, birth to the second round of the playoffs, and you were not supposed to do anything, that generally, ramps up expectations. When you invest nearly $350 million to bring the bulk of those guys back, that takes that and it's skyrocketed to the next level. When you hear the Blazers talk about, Damian Lillard has talked about, I think we can reach the Western Conference Finals at least. He talks about gunning for MVPs. Talking to Ed Davis yesterday, he's like, look, I know we're going to make the playoffs. What I want is I want us to become one of those teams that when you come to Portland, if you're not careful and if you're not at the top of your game as an opposing team, you're going to get embarrassed. And what he's talking about is the Golden State Warriors. If you go to Oracle and you don't bring your game, you can lose by 30. And Ed says, with the talent this team has, with the Moda Center, with the trajectory they have, he thinks they can and could become that type of a team. Now, all that said, there are still some legitimate question marks about this team. They invested heavily in it, but there are a lot of similar players. And while last season was nice, unexpected, a great ride, they still, in the grand scheme of things, only won 44 games and, beat to advance to the second round. So, you know, a lot of the questions that we have with this team are, can they take that next step? And they seem like they're poised to take that next step with all the continuity, with the talent they bring back, and some of that organic growth that we've talked about. But there still are question marks on that. And I think that will be a driving force of this season. How can this team handle increased expectations? How much can it grow internally and organically? And what do they have left to show us? And, you know, we've talked a lot about defense over the last few minutes. It's necessary. You talk to guys, guy to guy, and even Coach Terry Stotts. They were, you know, the bottom half of the league last year. They have to enter the top half, if not the top 10, to accomplish the goals that they set out to accomplish.
You mentioned the Golden State Warriors. How do you see the Western Conference shaking out? Because there might be a little bit of a power shift as far as some of the teams that were near the top. They lost some pieces. We've got some younger teams that added some pieces. Who do you see sort of making some jumps and improvement this year in the West?
Well, I think there's no question, Jordan, that when the Warriors are the creme de la creme. They're the undisputed favorite, not only in the West but in the league. A notch below them, I think you have the Spurs and the Clippers kind of positioned there, assuming that they're healthy. And then you've got several teams, Blazers included, right there in the mix that can either surpass their expectations or be in that 4 to 7. Because when you look at the Blazers, they're not the only young, up-and-coming kind of team on the rise in the West. You know, you've got your Minnesota Timberwolves. A lot of people are high on them and their exceptional young talent. And also the Utah Jazz, who have really been bitten by the injury bug, certainly last year and already now. They might have at least 2 starters out for tomorrow's season opener. But if they can stay healthy or find health anyway, they will be right there with the Blazers contending for that, you know, kind of 4, 5, 6 area. And so I think the Jazz, the Blazers, the Timberwolves could make a significant jump. Those are all kind of teams there. And, you know, there's a lot of hype about Houston as well under Mark D'Antoni. I need to see it first to believe it. But they finished 500 last year and in the 8th seed. A lot of experts are predicting they might be able to pursue 50 wins now, kind of with the shackles of Dwight Howard released from them. So we'll see. I mean, the West is as deep as ever. And Pigeon, bringing this back to the Blazers, another question mark with them is, you know, 44 wins was good enough for 5th in the West last year. It will not be good enough for 5th in the West this year, and that's something they readily acknowledge. So for them to do as well or surpass last year, they're going to need to win more than 44 games, quite a bit more, I think. And so it's an intriguing year as we've seen in some time, just because of those expectations and because of the possibilities with this team.
You know, the West is going to be exciting, Joe, for all of the reasons that you just mentioned. But I want to widen the lens a little bit and talk about how the championship was won last year, to zero in on a style of play question. Golden State's up 3-1. Draymond gets suspended. I thought Cleveland played most of the playoffs trying to play like Golden State, spreading the floor, shooting a lot of threes. But when they got their back against the wall, they started playing physical basketball, power basketball, back to the basket basketball, driving, offensive rebounding. Is that the style that's going to drive this league this year and going to be characteristic of the champion? Or is it the Golden State style and you just kind of take the 3-1 over Cleveland as really the realer deal because of Draymond's suspension?
I think it's the Golden State style, Michael. I really do. I mean, it's not just what Golden State has been able to do, but other teams have been able to do, sort of mimicking that style a little bit. I mean, even a few years ago, Greg Popovich, you know, kind of transitioned the Spurs away from a sluggish, grinded-out team to kind of an offensive-minded group. And it's just sort of where the game is going, with more three-point shooting, more spreading the court, more motion. Now, there are those outliers, and that certainly will play a factor, but man, not every team has LeBron James like Cleveland does that can sort of pick up for those things you lose in that. And like you said, playing without Draymond, look, the Warriors won a zillion games last year, and they just lost the worst possible last 3 that they could. But I think that they have sort of set a standard for what, if not the future of the NBA, it's certainly the present of the NBA looks like. And look, man, look at the Blazers. Their backcourt, you need a dynamic point guard in this league to succeed, and it really helps if you have 2 playmakers in the backcourt. And that's what puts the Blazers where they're at, and certainly in the mix, in not only, in the West to take that jump, they do who can create. And that's one thing that, now the Warriors have more than two, of course. That starting lineup is ridiculous, by the way. But so I think it's the Golden State is kind of the standard that everybody is chasing right now. And until a team proves time and time again that they can take a contrarian style, I think that's what's going to work right now.
Joe, thanks again for joining us. Enjoy opening night. We'll see you tomorrow night.
Awesome. Well, no problem, guys. I wish I could have been in there to debut that studio with you. Is it comfortable?
Oh, it's nice. It smells like a brand new house, to be honest, is what we said.
It's like a new kitchen.
Get into a brand new car. It's got that new car scent.
It's nice. We'll try to keep that as long as we can. But thanks again for joining us. We appreciate it.
All right. Take care, fella.